guys, before we jump into the episode, I've got some exciting news to share. Our brand new website has just been launched and is live at paulbegleypodcast.com. This is now your one-stop hub for everything podcast related. So instead of scouring all over the internet looking for links to the show, you can stream every episode, watch our latest YouTube videos, check out our guest directory to see who's been on the show, and even read our brand new blog for extra content. And if you're enjoying this podcast, we encourage you to leave a review right on the site. There's no login hassle needed to do this. Everything's right there. It's easy to access, mobile friendly, and it's built for you. So while you're listening today, take a second to check it out. paulbegleypodcast.com. Now back to the show. Joining us today is a very special guest, Will Spencer. He's the host of the Will Spencer podcast, world traveler, and someone who's had a pretty unique story. From Stanford to the dot-com boom to remote corners of the globe, Will chased spiritual truth through 30 different countries, diving deep into everything from ayahuasca in the Amazon to the Himalayan meditation. But it was at Burning Man where everything changed for Will, and that's where God found him. Now he's helping others find their way back to Christ and reclaim their God-given identity. Will, it's great to have you on the podcast today. I'm going to start off really to kind of introduce you to the audience a little bit better. You are from, and I think you still live in Southern California, or not Southern California, San Francisco area. Is that correct?
No, I'm originally from Phoenix, which is where I live currently.
Oh, you're from Phoenix. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I was listening to a pretty long podcast you had given, and you talked about San Francisco area. So where you were working previously? And can you just kind of walk us through a little bit? I know you graduated from Stanford. That's why I had to wear my Notre Dame shirt for you. But
noticing
can you just
that.
walk us through, and we'll go back and talk about your childhood a little bit. But can you walk us through kind of what you experienced at Stanford and what you were studying, and then pretty much your .com success as well, and just kind of introduce yourself a little bit better.
Yeah, so that's actually a great question. People don't, they haven't asked me about that before, about my time at Stanford. So I grew up in Phoenix and I went to Stanford to go to college in the mid 90s. And so this is Northern California. And then I stayed in the Bay Area for another 20 years after that before I went to travel, which I'm sure we'll get to. So Stanford, I didn't actually expect to get in. Stanford was like, I'm just going to apply just for the heck of it. And it turned out I got in. It was a huge, big celebration for my family. Obviously Northern California is beautiful, but what a lot of people, they know this intuitively, but they don't recognize just how influential Northern California is in the whole New Age, Eastern mysticism kind of world. And you have Esalen, right, which is a major socio-political factor in influencing culture. That's in Northern California. You have the Stanford Research Institute. And even in the mid 90s, when I was a freshman and sophomore, Stanford was going woke, like what we would identify today as woke. So in my sophomore year, there's a housing draw. It's sort of like a housing lottery where which dorm you're going to live in on campus, and you get a number. And if you have a really high number, you get your first choice of dorms. If you have a really low number, you get your last choice of dorms. So my sophomore year, I had a really low number, and the dorm that I was assigned to was the African American theme dorm called Ujima, where the theme dorm system at Stanford, there are 4 of them: African American, Asian American, Latino American, and the Native American. 50% of the residents have to be of the theme race. So I happened to end up in Ujima, the African American theme dorm. I loved living there. When I had a high number the next year, I went back because I really enjoyed the experience and the people. But you could see they were already doing this kind of like racially segregated sort of thinking. And everyone, even in 1996, when I arrived, I noticed that everyone was trying to immediately start to segment into their various racial and ethnic groups. And so I joined the Jewish Students Association because that was a bit of my background, which I'm sure we'll get into. So even way back then, it was really apparent, at Stanford, that like the humanities were on the way out and STEM was on the way in: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Even then, it's like there were techies. Those are the smart people, and you have the fuzzies, and we don't really regard them very much. So like literature and art and music, what's that? We're doing medicine, right, and science and computer science and stuff like that. So all of these trends that we're seeing today in culture broadly were present at the elite level in the university system in the mid 90s. And then we can talk about the dot-com boom as well, which I got into when I was a junior.
Sure. Well, before we get into that, though, so you mentioned you joined the Jewish Association as well, and
Jewish Students Association, yes.
talking a little bit about your childhood and your upbringing. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Will?
The Jewish Students Association or my childhood?
Your childhood specifically, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I grew up in a Reformed Jewish household. So Reformed Jews is a one of the major. It's not really denominations in the same way like a Christian denomination is. It's more like groups of levels of orthodoxy. So Reform, conservative, and Orthodox were the three, at least when I was a kid. So Reformed Jews are, for the most part, liberal, largely atheistic. They're what you might call culturally Jewish. They do lots of Jewish things, and this is what we did. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur services at the Phoenix Symphony Hall with the Jewish community in September. We had Passover at my grandparents' house, which we did, and we sung it in Hebrew. I was bar mitzvahed at age 13. We'd light the candles for Hanukkah. So we would do all of these things throughout the year. We didn't celebrate Shabbat every week, but we would do the major things. But for all of that, we didn't really talk much about God's character. I was never given a copy of the Old Testament or the Torah to read. We do these things because that's what Jews do. And so when I was 13, I was bar mitzvahed. My Torah portion, which is kind of like the sermon text for the week, but it wasn't something that I picked. It was sort of providentially assigned, was actually the Ten Commandments. And so if you're going to get a Torah portion as a 13-year-old kid to do a little, I guess, essentially a homily on, so, if you're in the Old Testament, that's a pretty good one to get. So that was sort
Right.
of
Yeah.
the beginning of my spiritual curiosity.
Pastor,
Would
you
you
have anything?
yeah, I do. I mean, because I've been to Israel 11 times. I know
Wow.
the Messianic rabbis all the way to the ultra Orthodox rabbis have friends among all of these groups and the secular Jews. I found them, most of them soon to be in Tel Aviv.
Mhm.
But they did what you did, and that is, the Passover, whether it be the Feast of Tabernacles or what have you, sort of like our in Christianity over here in the West, as you know, we got the Christmas and Easter folks. You go to Easter,
Right.
with your grandparents, and Christmas you should, you should go to at least one service, and that's pretty well their Christian experience. So I found that
Mhm.
kind of same thing goes on in Israel among the Jewish people. But what I didn't know among them was about the atheism, that even though they would do
Mhm.
these things, that they really didn't believe in God at all. I didn't realize it.
Yes. Yeah, it's so strange because it took me a long time to figure out that that was never me. I can't ever point to a time where I said I don't believe in God. I've always had this intuitive sense. Even when I was going through a reading Carl Sagan phase when I was in college, I could never shake this feeling that there was much more than the material. So I was never a full on like, yeah, I'm an atheist. But once I became Christian, a lot of my family pulled away and won't talk to me, and I'm not invited to family gatherings anymore, which is tragically common for many different ethnicities, not
Wow.
just Jews.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But the thing is, like, they call themselves Jews, and it's like, okay, like, well, have you read Genesis or Numbers or Deuteronomy or Isaiah? Have you read any of these? Like, and it's sort of an odd thing that they're Jewish, but don't talk to me about God. It's like, well, how can you be the chosen people of a God you don't believe in? How does that
Right.
work?
That's
Right.
that's
So
conflicting. That's got to be
it
conflicting.
That
a
actually
little bit.
kind of reminds me a little bit, Will. So, I mean, obviously, pastor is my father. So I was born
Really?
and raised up in the yeah, I was born and raised up in the church, right? But when I was 18 to 26 or whatever, and trying to figure out which denomination do I like, and when I was in school, I went to Purdue, but I wasn't wealthy enough to go here to Notre Dame, but when
That's
I was in
interesting.
school, I studied philosophy, and I think one of my favorite classes was Eastern religions because I didn't know anything about
Mhm.
it. Which I think you and I are probably shared that in common of trying to we want to know more about just one teaching or one religion, right? And so I thought Eastern religions was interesting, and we learned about Hinduism, Taoism, I can't remember everything else. Confucianism, which isn't really technically a religion, but and I thought that was interesting. But also some of the churches, like the Christian churches that I went to, when you talk about reform Judaism, it sounds to me a lot like, and I don't want to throw off on the Catholic Church, but there are quite a few people in the Catholic Church that have that same sort of practice of we go to mass and there's not a lot of God in the service, right? It's just we do these things, we come up, we take our communion, and the priest will have a message, but nobody really got anything from it. Nobody really talks about it outside of the church, and nobody really got anything other than, well, we went there today, or we went for Christmas at the Catholic Church today. So I don't know if I'm on the right lines of thinking, but it sounded like a lot of your childhood introduction was not really heavily, there wasn't a real presence of God actually in your teaching growing up, but it was more of like traditions.
Yes, correct. Yeah, that's very accurate. And we weren't quite like Christmas, Easter people. We weren't quite like go to mass every week people, but we were identifiably in it. Like we didn't celebrate Christmas, didn't have Christmas trees. We had a Hanukkah bush, right? That was my mom's innovation, and we would do Hanukkah and all that different stuff. So we were identifiably all throughout my childhood Jewish. But there was no discussion of what that meant in any spiritual sense,
right?
In any like who is God, who is this God that we're doing all these things? Like we would know about ourselves as a people. We do these things because the Jewish people do this, and this is our history, etc. But it was never like, well, this God that we're praying to, whether the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, or Passover, right? Like, who is this God that delivered us from Egypt? That was not part of the discussion.
Right. So
but it's not uncommon. Like that is, I would imagine that's most Reformed Jews in America. I'm sure there are at least a couple million of them. It's definitely not uncommon.
Right.
One quick question, just because I'm so curious. Have you ever met Noah Harari then, from the World Economic Forum?
No, I have not met Yuval Noah. I just did a video about him, actually. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Well, he would be an example. He's an example of something else. I don't know what guys like that are. I mean, he's a professor at Hebrew.
He's not a sapien. He's not a sapien. He's something else, right? Yeah.
I mean, he's a Satanist, right? He wouldn't call himself that, but that's ultimately what he is. And it's a shame because there are a lot of examples of guys like him who identify themselves as Jewish, and they believe in, they follow Satan or Lucifer or whatever term that they want to, or some other false god. And so you think about him and Jeffrey Epstein and Harvey Weinstein, and it's like, these are Jews. Like, no, they have nothing to do with Jews at all. It's a real shame.
That's a shame. Yep. Go ahead, Paul.
So, Will, I wanted to go back to back to college. Okay, so back to Stanford.
Oh, yeah.
So what were you studying when you were there?
I was a student in communication, so mostly human computer interaction. So my advisor in the communication department, he was studying why people respond to their computers like computers are people more differently from anything else. Like, you don't talk to your toaster, but people at the time were like interacting with their computers, and like their computers are human. And so he was studying like, why do we respond to this particular device that way? So that was my interest. I was going to do a master's honors thesis about it, but then that's when I got swept up into the .com boom in 1998, 99.
Right. And
it's amazing it brings up the .com. I just want to throw in one thing, because at that time I was working with a dinosauric industry, the wall covering industry, and we had a company that exploded with the little borders, and we were just doing great. We had talked about doing an IPO, and it was during the .com boom, and everybody that went, all these companies went public based on potential, not on profitability or performance.
That's right.
And so you had this massive .com explosion, and then the companies would phase out and die 3 years later, but everybody still walked away with millions. And
right.
we noticed that. So in that, you were right in that same era. Okay. You just happened to be. So I'm very interested. Did you start a company? Was you a part of a company? What happened?
Yeah, me and a bunch of fellow students from Stanford started a company, and this would have been summer of spring of '99, something like that. My junior year. I'd have to do the math. And the company was originally meant to be doing Y2K maintenance work. But along the way, we had an idea for a back end solution that would connect small business supply to a lot of these big channels like eBay and Amazon and stuff like that.
Oh,
So
yeah.
there weren't a lot of search. Google, by the way, at the time was only accessible via Stanford IP address. It was not a public facing company. They were still playing with their algorithm at the time. So the search engine world was a mess. You had people paying for search results, Alta Vista,
Yeah.
Yahoo, stuff like that. So that we didn't have the kind of open web where anyone could find based on credibility. So we were figuring, like, how is anyone going to find Mike's bikes on the internet? Well, they're probably not, but they're going to go to Amazon, they're going to go to eBay. So how do we connect Mike's bikes to Amazon and eBay? And so we ran with that idea. We raised millions of dollars from individual and institutional investors. I was 22 years old, and I got to go on the full ride. I famously spoke at a conference, and we had the top law firm in Silicon Valley, Wilson Sonsini, was representing us. I was on the board of directors. I met with the president of Hewlett Packard. We raised millions of dollars, and I got to see all the way down the tunnel.
Yeah, you guys created the conduit to connect all the little people to the big engines, Amazon and eBay. Great, brilliant
Definitely.
idea, and it had to be wildly successful. So that's awesome, really.
Yeah, it was a difficult run, probably not as successful as people think, but it was definitely, if it had been as successful as it could have been, I would own my own island right now probably, and I don't. So but definitely it was
Maybe
a
visiting
wonderful.
that. Yeah, okay, that's perfect.
Exactly. But it was an incredible learning experience for me, because for many different reasons. And one of the things, and I was like 22, 23 years old.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so there's a couple different ways to learn about the business world. And one is you start at the bottom and you work your way up. The other is that, like, they just throw you into a role where you kind of have to do everything at the highest level, and you kind of learn on the job. And that's what I did. And so that went on to later shape my entire approach to entrepreneurship, being able to start things on my own. It was also hugely informative to see how the startup world works, because one of the big lessons I walked away with was that all the startup, and this happened again in 2007, 2012 with the mobile boom, which is about a decade later. So
Right.
all
What
these
kind of
startups are like
what kind of boom?
the mobile web boom. So
Oh,
when
okay.
smartphones came out,
Yep,
this was like a second .com boom.
yep.
All these startup companies, like, we're going to change the world, we're going to do all these different things, we're rewriting all the rules and all this different stuff, and because you're naive, innocent kids. And then as soon as you sit down in the boardroom or the office of like Wilson Sonsini, or you start talking to like Goldman Sachs, and you see that, like, however much you think you're changing the world, kid, guess what? These channels and halls of power are old and thick and heavy, and you play by our rules. And so you can say whatever you want to your bros, you can say whatever you want to the cameras, but behind the scenes, like, this is how the game is played. So
Yep.
there's the front facing, and then there's the back room kind of stuff. I don't mean to imply anything seedy, but just like, when you're dealing with billions of dollars, you're not going to rewrite the rules. Sorry.
Right. I
Right.
understand. Yep, makes sense.
Yeah.
And then so Will, so at some point, so you caught the .com boom and you were still in school, is that correct?
Yeah, that was so we and my fellow students, we a bunch of us worked through the summer. The plan was to stop out. So Stanford was very generous at the time, that normally if you want to leave college, you have to drop out, and you have to just hard leave college, and you have to reapply. Stanford, because they knew so many students would have the opportunity to work in .coms or whatever, because it was just booming all around them, they gave
Right.
students the opportunity to stop out, meaning you can stop your studies, go do what you're going to do, come back. The only thing you do is you lose your guaranteed housing. So if you leave and you
Okay.
come back for 2 years later or whatever, you just can't live on campus. And so I took advantage of that option. but I think 13 of us went to go work in the summer. We rented an office up on the way to Santa Clara, up on the way to Santa Cruz, the Borland complex, which was a big tech company. We worked through the summer, and then a bunch of my fellow students went back to start up their freshman year because their parents were like, you should really go back to school. And the rest of us continued on.
The rest of you continued on in the .com industry?
Yeah, so of the original like 13 guys that started the company, we all sort of started it up together. I think it was like 8 or 9 of them went back to school when freshman year started, and 4 of us continued on to go and raise money, and we build up the company and do all that. So I stayed out of school for the duration, but a lot of guys just worked for the summer and then went back to school essentially.
You had mentioned before about this desire and urge to travel. Can you go into that a little bit for us? I'm actually quite a bit for us. That's the kind of is the big part of your story.
Yeah, it was a whole defining element of
All right.
20 years of my life, right? So, again, I was a student at Stanford. I went there in 1996. By 1999, I was in the middle of doing my startup. And then as we approached the end of 1999, I traveled back to Phoenix to visit my family. And I was going to go to, I was getting ready for New Year's Eve. It was over the holidays. So New Year's Eve, Y2K. And so my sister was into the DJ electronic music and rave scene. And so she's like, you should come with me to a rave for New Year's Eve. I'm like, okay, what else I got going on? So I went. I had never been to anything like that before. I was a super straight-laced kid. I worked so hard all the way through high school to get into college, and in college, like, once maybe I had a couple years where I was just, doing the usual frat party thing, but then I was in the startup world and I was just straight-laced Silicon Valley, peninsula, just, working in the startup. So I'd never done anything like this before. Why not? Right. So I went to this rave on New Year's Eve, and my sister gave me an ecstasy pill. Some people know it as MDMA. Some people know it as Molly today. And so she gave me that pill, and maybe an hour or so later, 2 hours later, I had this, eye-opening experience. I would probably call it a psychedelic experience, but I didn't leave my body or anything like that. Just like, the first time it hits, it's a very overwhelming kind of experience. And in that moment, I discovered within myself this desire to travel the world. And it was very odd because I felt very, very called to do this. Like, I really want to travel the world. I'll just be super honest with you guys. I wanted to travel the world as a DJ. That was the job that I wanted. I saw this guy doing this thing, and I was like, I would love to do that, right? And there was 2 parts to that. One was the DJing thing, but the other was a real desire to go see and explore the world. And that carried on with me for the next 15, 16 years. It was just sort of became this this guiding star, this North Star that I pursued. And so I couldn't shake it. But I don't think it was fundamentally a bad thing. However, like, it was definitely something that got a hold on me.
And you experienced people, cultures, locations, places like you had never seen before, and it brought a ton of fascination, I'm sure, and curiosity.
Yeah, there was definitely a huge component of it. I did ultimately succeed in my desire to travel the world about 16 years later. I'm sure we'll get to that. So that was a long process of making hard decisions and saving and just keeping my mind fixed on this goal. But yeah, I could never quite figure out what it was until I was finally doing it. And so I think you'll appreciate this. I come from the New Age world, so I'm going to talk about a lot of things that I was doing before I was a Christian. So I was seeing a psychotherapist in 2014 through 2016, something like that. And he had become a good friend. His name was Jamie. He was a good guy. And as I was getting ready to leave, he was talking about what my purposes were. And I said, I'm going looking for God. And I actually said that. He's the only person that I said that to because it sounded so trite. They're like, "Oh, really? You're going looking for God?" Sure. So I didn't say that to anybody, but it was a real thing. And I think that was a component of it. The same longing for God that I had when I was a kid continued forward and really wanting to go out there and look and see and find, looking for God, wanting to understand these world religions, wanting to put myself in challenging situations, adventures as a man. It was all of these things wrapped up together. Like I wasn't trying to find myself because I wasn't out there, but there were things that I wanted to learn that I could only learn out there in the world.
Right. And I think, yeah, Will, and I think you said it perfectly. And that's part of the reason we brought in your childhood and kind of like your religious foundation and upbringing. Yeah. I think maybe subconsciously after your experience with ecstasy, MDMA, I think subconsciously you had this urge to go see the world because really you were looking for something that was a higher power than you, right? You were, just sounds like you were a self-described agnostic at the time. So you never really denied anything, but you didn't really feel anything sort of. And then, I mean, that's what makes it interesting. Your journey, right? It's truth-seeking journey, but also like as you mentioned to your therapist, right? I'm trying to find God, right? And I don't really think that that's a crazy thing for anybody to say, honestly. I think most people
in San Francisco it is.
Well, I mean, yeah, it depends on the culture that you're or the environment that you're in, that people that you're raised around, and what everybody's like-minded thinkings are and teachings are. But it's the same thing that goes back centuries, right? It's I forgot what they call the spiritual, a walkabout. There you go, where man just goes and just kind of goes and walks and tries to find himself. But really, what are they searching for? Himself or his thoughts, or is he looking for God or something higher than
the vision quest?
Right there it is, the vision quest, not the walkabout, but
no, that's part of it too.
Yeah. So we want to get into some of the things that you did try as you were searching for God. If you could start, I know a lot of people are familiar with ayahuasca, but maybe a lot of people are not familiar with ayahuasca. I don't know if that's a good place to start, but I'll start there. If you could kind of describe what that is for our audience, if somebody doesn't know what that is, and then kind of your experience with that, Will, if you will.
Sure. Just quickly, let me clarify what my religious beliefs would have been at the time. Again, we're talking about like 2005 to 2016, somewhere in that 10-year period. I wasn't an agnostic. I knew that there was something, but I didn't think that the something was necessarily knowable, right? Which is different. Like, I don't know if there's anything as different, like from there's something, but I can't understand it. I can feel it, but I can't understand it. And so that's a particular New Age expression. It sort of shows up in these kind of all is one, all is God beliefs. Because if all is one and all is God, then everything is God. Then God is everything and sort of incomprehensible from a human perspective. And we're part of that. So us being a small piece of a much larger thing, we can't understand it, but we can be part of it. We can participate in it. And I think I would have said that those were my religious beliefs, versus people who I knew were like, there is no God, or agnostics who were like, yeah, I don't know. I was like, well, there's something, but I can't understand what it is, which of course is very different in some senses from the Christian picture. So ayahuasca is they call it a plant medicine. It's really just a drug. It's a drug derived from two plants. There's a leaf called chacruna, and the vine is called ayahuasca. So when you take these two and you boil them together like a tea, the psychoactive chemical DMT is released from the leaf, and the what's called an MAOI inhibitor is released from the vine. The inhibitor allows the DMT to be consumed via drinking. DMT is usually metabolized in the stomach and in the liver, but with the MAOI inhibitor, the DMT, which is a very powerful psychoactive chemical, passes through the digestive system into the bloodstream and then finally to the brain, which produces visions and hallucinations and stuff like that. So ayahuasca it's a psychedelic drug like many others, but there's a key difference. It's like acid, mushrooms, etc. You may have heard of these. The key difference, however, the way that ayahuasca is applied in the West, and then also in South America, Latin America, where it's from, the Amazon region, is that there is a familiar spirit that is associated with ayahuasca, whose name is fittingly ayahuasca. And so, what people will do when they drink ayahuasca is they will go in a ritualistic, shamanic kind of encounter, right, where you're being it is very much a religious ritual. You'll drink, the shaman or shamans will sing, and during the process of this drinking, you encounter spirit beings who guide you through your inner landscape to help you heal trauma and express your creativity. And so there is a definitive talk, a discussion about a disembodied spirit who goes by the name ayahuasca, always referred to in the feminine, mama ayahuasca, grandmother ayahuasca, the grandmother spirit. I've never personally encountered this, but that is in all of the ayahuasca literature, that you're going to commune with the spirit who tells you who you are. And so that is what ayahuasca is. It's very popular. I've done it 15 ceremonies in the United States and Peru. I'm not sure if I could show you this, but I've got an ayahuasca vine tattooed on my forearm. So you can kind of see a little bit of it here. It runs up my arm here. So that is what ayahuasca is. It's becoming increasingly popular. It's hugely popular in New Age circles and has been for 50 years. And now it's being brought slowly to the mainstream, particularly through the veteran community. Veterans who are suffering from PTSD are often have ayahuasca pushed on them by their friends, and also now by the Veterans Administration, to help them heal their PTSD. And this is a normalization campaign to bring it to the American public, which we've also seen through Joe Rogan and Mike Tyson and many
Right.
actors and musicians and stuff. So that's a lot. So we can jump in wherever.
Well, I'm curious because I didn't know anything really about it other than just kind of hearing. So, and when you bring up the fact that, okay, let's say you're in Peru, you're sitting in a setting with the elders. Are you in some kind of ceremony?
Yep.
And it's passing the drink around, or what happens?
Yeah. So the way the ceremony usually works is everyone, it depends on where you are, but there are some general traditional practices. Everyone walks into the main hut, or it's called a maloka. It's a thatch roof hut, and you have your little mat, and you have your little space that you're supposed to stay in, and everyone sits in there by candlelight, and one by one you go up to the shaman, and he gives you the little cup of the brew, which you drink, which tastes awful because it's like a really thickly brewed tea. It's not supposed to taste very good. Some taste worse than others. And you drink, and then you go back to your mat, and you sit there for about an hour, and that's how long it takes for the drug to kind of kick in. And then they blow out all the lights. And in the most traditional ceremonies are conducted in what's called the sacred silence and the sacred stillness. So what that means is you're not supposed to make noise if you can avoid it. Like, you're not supposed to cry out because everyone's hypersensitive to sound. You're not supposed to move around. You're supposed to remain on your mat, remain in your space as much as you can, and just go inwards. And then the shamans will come around and sing to the individuals. And through the singing, they're channeling what they call the plant spirits. So other plants that they have dieted with or that they drink a lot of. And so they sing to you their ikaros, their medicine songs, and that leads you on the shamanic medicine journey. So it's not, so in traditional ceremonies, it's not wild, it's not chaotic, it's not people going nuts. It's, there can be crying, like you're not supposed to wail openly, but if you're sobbing over something, or also vomiting is a side effect of ayahuasca, one of the more well-known ones. It's a purgative. It just leads people to want to vomit, so you can hear those sounds from time to time. But in general, it's heavily ritualistic, and it's a religious ceremony because you are communing with a disembodied spirit. That is the purpose of the thing. Unlike we're just going to take acid and go trip in the living room or whatever. It's like you're going to go commune with the spirit. Now it's going to give you the answers.
A disembodied spirit, because you mentioned the word familiar spirit. Okay.
Yeah.
And, I've studied demonology, of course. So,
yes, of course.
Familiar spirit. Are you talking about a spirit from a family member in the past, an ancestor, somebody that you may have known who's passed away, and that spirit's familiar, or something different?
No, when I say familiar spirit, I mean in the sense of there is a spirit associated with that drug.
That drug.
So
Okay.
yeah. So it's a I don't mean it's a family spirit. It's meaning
it.
like there's this brew that you drink, and there is, I mean, who knows if it's all the same spirit, right? Like it's all demons. They can wear all kinds of masks, but you are, versus like when people take mushrooms, which I've also done many times, that's just a personal individual thing. And maybe, maybe you'll have visions of things, or maybe you'll interact with something or whatever. But the purpose of ayahuasca is specifically to commune with this grandmother spirit ayahuasca. It's in all their literature. That is the point of the thing,
Mm.
because the grandmother spirit is the one who will give you the answers about yourself. And so in a sense, it makes sense, because you're going to this being that's on a higher plane of reality that knows you inside and out. You've drunk the magic potion that gives her the right to commune with you. That's you taking a
Open
step
the
towards.
gate.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so that's what ayahuasca is.
So you open the door really to this spirit, and it is a spirit. It is a demon, basically.
Yeah. Yes.
It also communicate with. I've had people tell me that that spirit will start communicating with all the people and around, not just you individually, but it can actually tie people together or create some type of where they're all seeing the same thing at once. Does that
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard of that happening. I have not personally experienced that, but I hear stories about that all the time. That it's a collective communal experience will
Wow.
happen for one or for multiple people in the room.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that we could probably do a whole series about ayahuasca, because there's a lot of different takes. And Will, what you're describing it sounds mostly like the ancient literature, or like the Peruvian literature that they use, and part of their shamanistic rituals, trying to see or summon, you know, essentially is summoning like a earth religion type mama, or what do they call Pachamama,
That's
you
it.
know, where the Peruvians, most of their religion, especially up in Cusco as well,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they have this earth religion, which it makes sense that they would use ayahuasca for a religious ceremony. But there's also you know, Western not thinking, but you know, literature as well. From I don't know if you're familiar with the book DMT, the Spirit Molecule,
Oh
by
yeah, Rick
Dr.
Strassman.
Yeah, Rick Strassman, where really they're doing clinical trials and studying DMT, and they
Mm-hmm.
break it so far down as to like pineal gland, and they call it the spirit molecule because it's like the first thing that comes into your pineal gland when you're born, and it's the last thing that is around when you die. So DMT is most highly activated naturally during those two states. So there's like a
Mm-hmm.
whole, you know, you could go into the earth religions, as far as the ayahuasca goes, or just DMT that you're creating, but you can also go into the clinical trials and read about it that way as well. But my question for you, with those two distinctions and two different lines of thinking, from your experiences and partaking, um, I guess I have a couple questions, but were
Mm-hmm.
you looking to go with that Latin American type thinking for your experience, to look for a calling spiritually, or from the God that you were trying to find, or were you
Mm.
doing this more recreationally as something you wanted to experience?
Man, you asked the best questions. So, the first thing is I probably should take a step back and explain sort of the contours of my what would have been my personal religion. This is not unique to me. It's not something that I invented, but it's very common. And so the religion is it's not well known, but it's a very popular religion in the West and has been from the 1960s. It's called selfism. And so selfism is based on the teachings of Carl Jung. There's a book by Dr. Peter Jones, The Other Worldview, that talks a lot about this. And then Paul Witt's Psychology as Religion is another one. Philip Reef, The Therapeutic Worldview, something like that. Uses of therapy after religion, something like that. Where because the Christian religion was displaced from Western society, people started looking for religion in psychology. And so when you take that idea, like I'm going to go within, this is Carl Jung, I'm going to go within to find my religious truth. And when you blend that together with Western notions of productivity and personal growth and experience, you get the religion of selfism. And that was my religion. So I can go within to find God. Like I can't find God up there. I'm going to go within to find God within myself. And I'm going to seek to grow as a person to have ever increasing fulfillment and happiness and freedom. that's the religion of selfism, and that was the religion that I practiced. And so again, Dr. Peter Jones, the other worldview, sort of talks about how Carl Jung fit into that and how central he was to that. So that was essentially my religion. I didn't recognize it as such because I didn't have a position to stand from, to look at it, to compare it to, but that's what I was doing. So these processes that I was doing as I traveled were about discovering the inner truth of God within and seeking to grow as a man, and overcome my fears and weaknesses and insecurities so I could be more confident, all these different things. Because I grew up in a liberal feminist household where I discovered it was bad, and it was bad to be a man. Men bad. Men have been awful throughout all of history. And so, we need to avert our eyes and look down and be ashamed. Like, okay, well, I guess I'll do that. But I found that it was miserable living my life that way. So I set out on this, and I broke free of that. And then I set out to kind of, again, to pull all of that wiring out of. So that was the purpose of why I was drinking ayahuasca, was to overcome some of my own fears and limitations in that regard. But it wasn't, but it wasn't something that I wanted to be a part of. Just to be real clear, there are people who, when you talk about the new age world, people get into yoga, or they get into ayahuasca, or they get into crystals or sound healing, and that becomes their whole identity. Like, I am now an ayahuasca person, or I'm now a yoga person, or whatever. That was never me. It was always, I'm going to use all of these different tools that the new age is presenting to me to fix different aspects. So I'm going to take this tool off the shelf. I'm going to use this, put that back, use this tool, right? I wasn't going whole into that world. I would go in, get what I needed, and then leave to continue to grow in the ways that I had thought that I needed to.
Is that what led you into meditation in the Himalayas?
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, right there, when I saw this in the notes, I thought, okay, this has got to be something to do with either Buddhism, or maybe Hinduism, maybe both. But certainly you're going into, I don't know if you went to see the monks up there in Tibet somewhere. Where were you? Okay.
I was in Kashmir. So a lot of people know where Kashmir is today because it's been in the news.
Yes.
So this was so the ayahuasca retreat that I went on, that I've been talking about, that was summer of 2016. Yeah, June 2016. So now fast forward to April 2019, March, April 2019. I was in India, and I had heard about this Vipassana meditation, Goenka Vipassana. So Vipassana is a Buddhist style of meditation. The Buddhist word Vipassana means to see things as they really are. And Goenka is a man, S.N. Goenka. He was an Indian businessman in the 1950s, I believe, who started having debilitating migraines, and went to doctors and all these different specialists to try and get the headache solved, and none of them worked. And so finally he went to a Buddhist meditation, like a monk, and he found that through meditation he was able to cure his migraines. So he was a successful businessman, and he threw himself into Buddhist meditation and ended up, I believe, in Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, he found a Buddhist monastery that claimed to have had the original pure teachings of Buddhist meditation going back to the alleged Buddha himself. And so they trained Mr. Goenka in this Buddhist style of meditation, Vipassana, which he mastered. And then he went back to India and founded a series of retreat centers in the 1960s. And then, of course, you had the major wave of Westerners coming to India in the 1960s. They picked up on the style of meditation, and they spread the style of meditation, these retreat centers around the world. So Goenka Vipassana is a major meditation retreat center network across all the world, thousands or hundreds or thousands of different retreat centers that are teaching this specific Buddhist style of meditation. They teach it over the course of 10 days. So it's a silent retreat. There's no talking the entire time, and you meditate for 10 hours a day for 10 days. Wow. Not all in a stretch. So it's in like 1 hour blocks, and then 2 hours, right? So you're not going to just sitting there for 10 hours, but the wake up starts at like 4:30 in the morning to do your first 2 hour meditation session. And then you have a very light breakfast, and then more meditation, then a very light lunch, and then more meditation. Then you go to bed. And so that's Goenka Vipassana. And it was one of those retreats that I did in the mountains of Kashmir, way up high in the Himalayas. So very, very low budget, very low tech retreat center. So the meals were served in a shipping container. that had been turned into a dining hall. They didn't have toilets. They had a giant outhouse with a small rectangle hole that you would squat down and do your business over. And fortunately, I think it was solar powered, so it was very, very low tech environment to be in. We slept on cots basically. So that was in 2019.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's like a convent in the mountains. But
Yes.
and not a lot of dialogue. I take it not a lot of teaching, just mostly meditation.
There is actually. I'm glad that you mentioned that. The teaching. So Mr. Goenka, he passed away in, I want to say, the 1990s or the 2000s, something like that. So now the teaching is done through video recordings of him. So
Okay.
the same teaching is done at all of these retreat centers around the world, where we watch these old videotapes and listen to him do the instruction and then sing. And there is a teacher, a trained teacher on site. And so if you do want to ask questions, you can sit down and talk to the teacher. You're just not supposed to talk to each other. The one thing I'll say, like, obviously it's deeply pagan, and I can say quite a bit about the deep errors of Buddhism. But the one thing I will say is that these retreats are free, meaning like you can go on the retreat and they only ask you to pay at the end what you feel you've gotten out of it. So you can show up, you can do the entire 10 days, eat, get the instruction, and leave and not pay $1. And so I do appreciate that, because there are plenty of other retreat centers around the world that are very expensive. And so these are not. And so I appreciate that they have an austere approach, and they're wrong, but at least they're sincere and they're being wrong. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, well, Will, actually, I would personally, I would agree with you, and I think a lot of, I mean, we could extend even farther about all of your experiences, and I'm interested to do that. I just don't know if we're going to record all of that right now.
Yeah, for sure. Always available.
Oh, that's awesome to hear. But I'm curious, because it sounds like you're taking. I like your approach that you were taking to this, because you're obviously coming to this with a curious mindset. There's something that you were feeling that you were missing, so you would like to go. A lot of people want to go travel the world and do all types of different experiences, right? Maybe not everybody wants to go to do ayahuasca, but I'm sure there's plenty of people that do. I mean, it wouldn't be around forever if it wasn't that way. But I like the approach that you were taking to this, and smartly, so as well as a Stanford grad would do, right? So you're going and having these different experiences, and then using them as you were saying, kind of as tools for yourself, for the your personal religion that you didn't really know was a religion anyway, which was pretty much, well, if I have a problem, I can fix it, and I can just go study or learn or go somewhere else and figure out a different toolkit, grab it, put it in my toolbox, move on to the next thing, and keep fixing myself without actually asking for anything from God, right? I don't know if I'm saying that the right way. That's just kind of.
Yeah, and there wasn't. Yeah, you are, but there wasn't really the concept of a personal God. So, in the all is one concept, which is called monism, there isn't really a lot of clear instruction on, if there is a higher consciousness, does this consciousness know who I am or care about me? Now, I might be part of God. My body or my soul, my body and my soul might be part of this cosmos, but this thing that's larger than me, I'm like a neuron in the brain. Think of it that way, like, or a cell in the body, right? Like, I don't know about the cell that's right there. I'm part of God, but God doesn't know about me. So there wasn't really the sense that you could pray to a personal God to receive something. You could use your own mind, and I think you said this rightly, that you could rely on yourself or your own ability to manifest reality, because reality is responsive to the mind. You can do that, but you can't really pray. I did find myself praying from time to time, to the universe, but I never had a good sense of who or what I was praying to. But I still would pray. I think everyone prays, even if they don't know who they're praying to.
Right. So I think that's a good lead into, right? So adding tools to your toolbox, right? So and as we talked to, and you did as well on your podcast, Carl Tykrib, then you went to Burning Man, and you've had, I don't know if you've been there multiple times. I think that you have.
Yeah,
but
3 times.
3 times. Okay. And then you had an experience at Burning Man.
Yeah. So living in the Bay Area, Burning Man has been a facet of Bay Area life for 20, well, now it's been 30 or more years. And so now almost everyone knows what Burning Man is. And in case you don't know what it is, it's a 80 or 100,000 person festival in in Nevada desert, a dry lake bed. It's explicitly pagan, very hedonistic, and it's been going on for 30 or so years. So now it's sort of broken out into public consciousness since a lot of the tech people, Mark Zuckerberg and the Google founders, have started going and being more open about it. But I was living in the Bay Area in the early 2000s before that tech boom, and I certainly heard about it then. So the first time I went to Burning Man was in 2003. It was maybe 25,000 people at the time. I went back in 2013. Maybe it was like 60,000 people. And I went back a third time in 2015. And by that point, 70 or 80,000 people. So this is 2015, the experience that you're talking about. I had been in a long-term relationship that didn't work out. And not only did it not work out, we were not good for each other. And it was time for that to come to an end. And so I was very much a tent camping kind of guy, and she was very much an RV kind of girl. And so we broke up, and I was like, wow, I can actually just go to Burning Man in a tent now, and it's not a big deal. So, right. So I got a ticket, went to Burning Man, brought, basically just what I could carry, and showed up at a friend's camp. A whole bunch of people were there, and they're like, Will, what are you doing here? I'm like, that's a long story. Can I set up my tent? and so, and so the next morning, I woke up and I met the guy whose tent was set up next to me, and we started talking. And I happened to mention that I was just coming off a breakup. And he said, "Oh, well, if you're just coming off a breakup, you should go, and you're grieving. You should go to this camp, Spirit Dream. I just saw them this morning. They're great. They're just right over there, just a few blocks away." I'm like, "Okay, that sounds cool." So then I went riding over to Camp Spirit Dream.
Well, I think that anytime people have a breakup of any sort, there's an immediate response to go searching.
Yeah.
What's next? Not necessarily who's next. What's next for my life? Okay. Yeah. That's a typical reaction, no matter what religious background you come from or no religious background. People tendency, they feel like, okay, just that's over. What's next in my life? Where am I going in my life? And so here you are, you're a Burning Man, but you've been there before. So that was something familiar, at least for you, because you'd been there a couple times. And now you're going there. You don't have to worry about getting along with your ex, and you can go ahead and pitch your own tent, but you're immediately having to find an answer. And then you're led to Spirit Dream. I don't know what that means yet, but there's always two things. There's two entities that will come into your presence when a person's soul searches: God and Satan. They come in many different forms, but they both show up when a person starts to search. So I don't know your story, so here I am. It's Spirit Dream.
Oh, this is great. Then you're on the edge of your seat. So so I ride over to Camp Spirit Dream, and it's a big camp with a big military style tent, and people are having what look like private conversations, small groups having private conversations. And on the front, they offer a billboard with a list of services. And the billboard says like free fall, dream interpretation, stuff like that. I'm like, okay, dream interpretation sounds cool. So, because I had done some of that. And so they do a number of seatings, and they bring everyone in. On the last person seated, I think this is a Thursday morning, the last person seated in the morning seating. And I sit down with three people in my chair, and they're sitting in front of me, a woman in her probably late 50s named Katie, a woman in her early 40s called Barb, and a man in his 70s called Larry. And so what proceeds is I end up having a 3.5 hour healing encounter conversation with them, where I'm just like pouring out my soul to them. It's not unfamiliar to me with a lot of the inner healing stuff I've done. We're working through stuff related to my mom, and we're working with stuff related to my dad. and various other things that at this moment I can't recall, but it was a very, very emotionally cathartic for many reasons. Just to give you an example, so I mentioned the household I grew up in. I've talked about this a little bit. My mother was addicted to drugs and alcohol when I was a kid, and she was of the sort of woman who, there's a term for it now. It's a sort of a smothering mother, narcissistic mother, spousalizing, where she had displaced her affection for my father onto me as her son, which is a very unhealthy thing to do. Don't do that. And so that was something that I struggled with for quite a long time. And so here was this woman sitting in front of me. Her name was Barb. My mother's name was also Barbara. And here was a woman sitting in front of me saying, like, it kills me as a mother to let my sons go, but I know that I have to do that. And I was like, wait, what? I had never heard of such a thing. The idea that a mother could willingly let her son go out into the world without, holding on to him was just like I could not have imagined, like, does this even exist? Like, a unicorn makes more sense to this. And so that was a very, I can feel myself getting emotional about it right now. That was a very cathartic moment to understand, like, oh wait, that's what it means to have a healthy mother in many ways. That's just an example. So at the end of this, and it's like 3.5 hours of that, but I can just from all the inner healing stuff that I'd done, I had a lot of stamina to work with it. So at the end of this, like for 3.5 hours, I'm like, okay, I think I'm good. And so, but during this time, I'm looking around the tent, trying to figure out like what their spiritual beliefs are. Like, because normally you go to Burning Man and you see a Shiva statue, like the dancing Shiva in the fire, or you see
Right.
Buddha statues or psychedelic artwork or anything like that. And I didn't see anything like that. I saw what looked like some pastel kind of drawings, like there's a lion and there's a ram over there, or like a bull, and like there's an eagle. Like, what is all of this, right? And so I'm just kind of baffled. I couldn't figure out what their beliefs were. So at the end of this healing encounter, one of the women, Katie, stands up and stands behind me, and she's standing behind me, and she puts her hands on either side of my head like this, not touching me. I'm seated. She's standing behind me, and it sounds like she's praying, but I can't make out what she's saying. And so she's praying, and I close my eyes and just to be in prayer with her. And with my eyes closed, I have this vision, like a closed eyes vision. And I can see the street at Burning Man. People are riding their bikes down the street. There's flags blowing in the breeze. There are tents and dust flying around. And as I'm looking out at this kind of vista, a man walks up to me. And he walks up to me. He doesn't say anything. And he's got Burning Man goggles on. And I can kind of make out the shape of his face and his hair. Like, okay. And the face there seems to insist, like, no, look. I'm like, okay, I see you. And so I open my eyes. And then Katie says, I want you to come with me. There's someone I want you to meet. And so she takes me back to the other end of the tent. Now, at the entrance to the tent, there was this four-sided pillar with hangings, like art hangings from it. And so when I walked in, the side of the pillar that she takes me to, I could not have seen, because I went on one side. She takes me to the pillar, to the other side of the pillar, turns me around, points me up and points me at the pillar. And there on the pillar is the face I had just seen, in the vision. And it was the face of Jesus Christ. And from a particular painting by an artist named Akiane. Maybe some of your listeners will know who that is. And so it was that face minus the Burning Man goggles that I saw painted up on the pillar. And so I turned to Katie. I'm like, who are you people? It's like, we're Christians. Like, what are you doing here? And so Spirit Dream was an underground Christian ministry that had been running at Burning Man for 12 years at that point. So they had been they weren't overt about the fact that they were Christians. They learned to speak the language. They learned to fit in with the community, because obviously a big cross wouldn't have gone over well. But they were there to minister and show God's love, God the Father's love, to the lost and the searching people like me. And so I just happened to walk into to the tent that day.
Wow, that's a wonderful encounter and very visual story as well, Will. That I'm happy you shared that with us, because one of the things that we talked about on our interview with Carl Tykrib was he had mentioned that actually, and we brought up you in that episode as well. He had mentioned that there was about 3 different Christian evangelizing groups in Burning Man camp. His is one of them, the Camp of the Unknown God. This camp that you went to as well, and I don't think you mentioned the other one, but it sounds like, you know, the approach that the camp took for you is what we thought was a good distinction and way of evangelizing, of not intrusive evangelism. It's, hey, a lot of people, and Pastor, I think you said it better before, everybody will find their way to be in that type of position to be ministered to.
Yeah.
Most people don't want to be accosted on the street by somebody with a loudspeaker yelling at them to repent or go to hell, or most people don't like that. It's a very abrasive type of ministering. So I think it's I think that your story, that your encounter, your testimony, and your story that you just laid out for us is a really good example of that non-intrusive ministry that resonated with you and caught you at the correct time of your life. Vulnerability, searching for truth, emotionally with a breakup as well. So I just think that that's a really powerful testimony. But I wanted to we'll kind of go back to your timeline with that. So that this was in 2015, and Will, you sent me an email yesterday for this timeline distinction that I wanted to say here. This, I mean, although this, I believe this was a pleasant encounter for you, this wasn't the defining moment to bring you to Christ, correct?
It wasn't. So that experience. So again, at the time, I had an all is one, all religions are equal paths up the mountain to God kind of mindset. It just so happened that from a San Francisco perspective, the Christian Pokemon, let's say, was the hardest one to catch. That was kind of how I was thinking about, like, oh wow, okay, I've had an authentic Christian experience. Cool.
Right.
And so, but what really made an impact on me wasn't that. It was that later that winter for Christmas, I went to go visit Camp Spirit Dream. Many of the people live up in Coeur d'Alene. So the Camp of the Unknown God for Carl Tykrib is just a handful of people. Spirit Dream is like 40 or 50 people spread out across the country. It was not so much a Burning Man camp as a missionary endeavor. And so a lot of the folks live up in Coeur d'Alene. And so they invited me to come up for Christmas. And I went up to visit them for that Christmas. And they were so warm and so loving and so joyful. And they were just like singing psalms, and, they were drinking wine, and just really, they had the aroma of Christ, is the language I would use today. But I finally felt like I had met Christians who embodied what I always had expected Christians to be. Like the only other Christian that I had really met was during my startup days, a man named Jeff. He was the graphic designer, and I found him really entertaining. And he would just all day sit at his computer and be like, "Praise Jesus, Pam, praise Jesus," all day long. And I was the only one who could I thought he was entertaining. Other people, they didn't like that. But as much as I love the guy, and I hope he's doing well today, there was a moment after that summer when. This is back in 2001, when I really needed a friend. I was going through something difficult, and I called him to talk to him because I didn't know who else to talk to. And he sort of emotionally manipulated me into saying the sinner's prayer. And then it's like, okay, thanks, gotta go, bye. And it was like, I felt very used by that. And so that was the only other encounter. I love the guy, and I understood that was his beliefs, but that was not what I needed in that moment. And so to meet these Christians again 15 years later, and to spend time with them, to find how joyful and loving they were, that really made an impact on me. But then it was after that I finally started to travel 3 months later in 2016. So the experiences that you've heard me talk about with ayahuasca and meditation and a bunch of other stuff, that was all after I had that encounter with Camp Spirit Dream at Burning Man. But that planted a seed in me that took about, we'll say, 4 years to grow. 5 years, actually.
That's really good, because what happened was you found the authentic experience with Christ. Yet you needed this fully, and you're different than a lot of other people, and that is a lot of folks don't pursue or don't really investigate things. They just accept things. It's brought to them. Okay. You're an investigator. You want to fully flesh out the entire thought process, and then you'll make the right decision based on the actual information you have. So after you go and do flush that out again, you say, you know what, I got to go back to this, to the one thing that seems like has the concrete answer. Right. And then when you started pursuing it, I'm jumping ahead here, maybe just guessing, but when you started to then really to dig into what Christianity was about or what Christ was about, you probably went into some spiritual warfare. You probably did go into some, because I must say right now, the dark side doesn't let go easy. Okay. They don't want you finding the truth, to really find the truth of God and his love toward all of us through his son Christ. And so I take it that, and you'll tell us, you started pursuing, and doors started opening to the truth, to the truth of God's love for humanity. He truly loves us.
It's a profound thought. What is man that you take note of him? Like it's just mind-boggling. So, from 2016, from March of 2016 to March of 2020, I was overseas traveling. I would find places to hole up for a while. I thought I was going to live in New Zealand, so I spent a good bit of time there. But I continued this process of doing a lot of these New Age practices, doing a lot of adventuring, sailing the South Pacific and climbing mountains and stuff like that, really putting myself in situations where non-negotiable nature. The storm in the middle of the ocean on the sailboat you don't get to call time out. Like, you just got to make it through this experience. Right. And I think men long for that. I think men long to encounter something that is difficult and that they have to just go through the situation, right? That used to be the way the world worked, right? Like, the crop, winter's coming, the crops didn't come up, and now we're just not going to have enough food for the winter. We just got to get through it. We don't deal with. We have such peace and such security and such abundance. We don't have to experience that kind of difficulty. So I went and I sought out a lot of that difficulty, as well as the New Age practices, some of which we talked about. However, I started thinking about the moral and theological implications of my beliefs. So all is one and all is God. Right. Those were the two guiding principles. And so then I encountered the reality of child trafficking, like Jeffrey Epstein. And I was like, hold on a second. And then there's karma, right? So there's no judgment. There's only karma. You do bad, it comes back to you later in the next lifetime. You do good, it comes back to you in the next lifetime. Right. And so here is this absolutely horrible practice that no one just stumbles into. No one wakes up, trafficking child. Like, didn't know, like, obviously everyone knows. So I was like, well, could you really say, could I look that child in the eyes and say, sorry, kid, that's just your karma? Like, something that you did in a past life is leading this to be this situation, or that something the trafficker did in a past life is leading him to be in that situation? I just couldn't say that. I couldn't bring myself to say that. Right. And I couldn't get anyone in the New Age world to say that either. Right. So I had found information that shattered the worldview. So I can take the information or the worldview, the two don't fit. What am I going to throw out? Well, I'm going to throw out the worldview. And so I came back to the United States in February of 2020, again, sort of off a breakup. It didn't work out in New Zealand. And I got out of New Zealand weeks before COVID, like literally weeks. I'm talking mid-February, and COVID started landing in the world 4 weeks later.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, so praise God for that. But as I arrived back in the United States, my friends in Coeur d'Alene from Camp Spirit Dream, I had been in touch with them all throughout my travels. We were in a Facebook Messenger group that we're actually still in today. And Rob, the leader of that camp, had sent me the book Simply Christian by N.T. Wright. And so as I come back from the journeys, he had sent it to a friend of mine. That friend picked me up from the airport. I arrived back in the United States, and he put that book in my hand. And so I get back to Phoenix, and getting my life all situated, COVID starts happening. And I'm starting to see like, okay, I don't buy any of this, but it's still happening anyway. I'm seeing evil march over the world
All right.
and control.
Yeah.
And so I start reading Simply Christian. And in the book Simply Christian, I'll never forget, I was in my dad's apartment because I was staying at his place until I could get my own place. And I was sitting on his couch and I was reading, and I will never forget the scene where in the book where N.T. Wright is describing Christ up on the cross. This giant wave of evil was going to come and crash over him, but through his death and resurrection and sacrifice, he drove back the wave of evil forever. I remember reading that and like, I got it. Like here's someone finally talking about the existence of evil. And so as this is all happening during COVID, then I go and I buy the only other book about Christianity that I know, which is Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. And I was even like, is this the same C.S. Lewis? And then
That's what I was sitting there thinking too.
Right. And then I read Screw Tape Letters, and that was all throughout that summer. And there was stuff that I was writing. I had a blog post go viral as I'm starting to become Christian in July of 2020. And then I flew up to Coeur d'Alene in Labor Day weekend 2020. I asked my friends from Spirit Dream to baptize me, which they did in the Spokane River. And so, and I knew going into the baptism that for the first time in my life, I had casually engaged in all of these religious or spiritual practices, but none of them had ever asked a commitment of me. You know, ayahuasca never asks you to become part of the ayahuasca cult. There's never a formal initiation in that way. But I knew that if I was going to ask my friends who are faithful believers to baptize me, that my baptism was me making a promise. This is me saying, I want to be part of this. And that was my attitudes towards going into that. And I'll never forget, I went down to the water and I came back up and I walked up to I get emotional. I walked up to the shore and just sat down on a log, and I felt like this big weight had come off.
Yeah. Wow.
And it took me a while to tell that story because I had read Pilgrim's Progress, and I was like, it sounds too much like that. But like, I remember having that experience. So that was real.
A big weight did come off. I mean, it really did. I mean, amazing journey.
Right.
I mean, an incredible journey to get to this moment. And to finally know that this is it, that I found him. I found God, and God has found me, and he's lifted this incredible weight of a lot of things. I'm hearing a lot of things. Childhood, misdirection, hurting, pain, different things that's happened.
Idolatry.
Who you are, all of it coming together at once.
Yeah.
In relief. And it's still touching you right now. Just telling your story. This is your testimony.
Yeah. Well, because I can see what's happened over the 5 years since then. Right.
Yeah.
And you said very rightly that that the darkness wasn't ready to give up on me. And so this was 2020. So there weren't a lot of churches that were open. And it took me about a year to find one. So that whole first year of being a Christian was just full of demonic attacks, me being wrapped up with a guy who had done, I found out later, a demonic ritual. And like, I was really worried, like he was going to try to kill me. I don't know if he ever actually was, but there was he was a guy I was on a road trip with. And I was like, I really feel like I'm in physical danger from this guy. And I couldn't figure out why. It's this really persistent feeling. And so that whole first year was rough. And I didn't actually find a church until like October, November of 2021. So it was over a year before I was able to find a church that was open. Yeah. So,
and here you are, a young Christian. And now, so you're probably reading the Bible, you're studying, you're figuring this whole thing out, but the demons of hell are still trying to grab you. I mean, literally now it's getting serious now. This is a confrontation. Spiritual warfare is taking place.
Oh yeah. Well, I wasn't reading the Bible yet. I didn't know. I didn't know that I needed to do that because again, there was no, but I knew that Christians did a number of things. I knew that Christians prayed on their knees next to their bed before they went to sleep. And I knew that Christians went to church, and I knew that Christians forgave other people. Those were the three things. That's what I associated with my mind. So I better start.
Thank God. Those are three pretty good ones. I mean,
yeah.
Yes. So I didn't even know how to pray. So I just would pray on my knees and say the Lord's Prayer for some reason I had memorized that. Okay. I say the Lord's Prayer before I went to bed. And that's basically what I knew. And so it wasn't until I started I found a church to go to and got introduced to the doctrines of grace that I was like, oh, okay. That was like early 2022. And so that's when early 2022, about 18 months after I became a Christian, is when I really started diving into the Bible and really starting to listen to sermons and understanding the faith. But up until that point, yeah, it was kind of a free for all.
It was, but you had the thank God you had the simple, pure receiving of Christ and that simple pureness in your heart, and you went with that, and that was amazingly. That was just the Holy Spirit truly just guiding you through it. And then now that you found a church and you found the Word of God and your fellowship and power of prayer and understanding grace and understanding what God does and what He can do in our lives, man, this has got to be relief. This has got to be transformational.
Yes, very much so.
The quest is over for hunting for truth. Now it's learning to live in the truth.
That's right. That's right. And I'm engaged to be married. We get married to faith.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That's in mid-July.
When's the wedding?
Mid-July, Friday, July 18th.
Oh, thank God.
Oh, that's fast. That's coming right up.
Yes. We got engaged on Good Friday. So it was a very
good. Oh, cool.
This is good. This is really good.
Yeah. It's yeah. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to ask, so with this, after your salvation though, so this is fairly recent in 2020, because we're only in 2025 now. Mm-hmm. At some point you started, I think before it was the Will Spencer podcast, which it is now. I forgot what was the name of it again? Renaissance of Men. Is that
the Renaissance of Men? Yeah.
Okay. And was this? Can you talk about that a little bit? And actually, you can go ahead and talk a little bit. Introduce your podcast to our audience as well if they haven't been over there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Happy to. So, so I started my podcast that was in 2020. It was called The Renaissance of Men. So okay. I had been baptized, but I had just arrived at the conclusion, essentially, of 20 years of trying to figure out what it means to be a man. And I had discovered during that process that I was not the only one wondering about that there were men all over the world that had somehow generationally lost touch with masculinity and what it means to be a man. And there was an entire industry of influencers that were attempting to answer that question. And, Pastor Paul, you said that I'm an investigator, and that's a great way of putting it, because I had investigated that world as well. And I looked at all these different influencers that were taking different cracks at what it means to be a man. I'm like, everyone's trying to recreate what it means to be a man. It's a rebirth of masculinity. That was the Renaissance of Men. And that was the original point of the podcast, was to sort of be like, here are all these men talking about what it means to be a man, to let people know that this is a wider conversation. But the world that I'd found my way into, called the manosphere, sort of collapsed in 2022. And that's how we got Andrew Tate in many ways. You may know his name. If you don't, that's another conversation then. He's a bombastic, influencer who made his money on digital striptease. Let's put it that way. Wow. So flaunts good. You don't know who he is. So flaunts his cars and his muscles and all that different stuff. So he's a major negative figure in the dialogue about masculinity around the world. But anyway, so that world had collapsed in 2022. A lot of men had revealed themselves not to be the guys they said they were. It was not a Christian movement at all. But I still had this podcast that people were listening to. And I had found my way into the world of Reformed theology. And because the church that I went to that taught me the doctrines of grace was called Apologia. And so it's a Reformed Baptist church. And so I had discovered that there are all these pastors and content creators who would also talk about masculinity, but from a Christian perspective. And so I had spent, again, think about all the investigations I've done. I investigated ayahuasca and meditation and global spirituality and psychotherapy. And so then I investigate the world of masculinity, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to leave that world. And then I find the world of Reformed theology. And I spent just 2 years diving into that world and being able to have conversations like this, sitting down on a podcast and getting to learn from somebody for an hour or 2 hours was a really powerful experience as I'm attending church, as I'm starting to read scripture, as more godly men are coming into my life. And so, but last year I realized that the title for the podcast, The Renaissance of Men, no longer applies, because I'm not talking about masculinity so much anymore. Sure. In fact, I'm more interested in theological and worldview issues. And I come to realize that people aren't listening to the podcast for the subject matter. They're listening for the people that I choose to interview. And so the podcast, it's not about me per se, but it's about sort of the intellectual journey that I'm taking people on through the things that I'm learning about. And so I'm like, it's probably time for me to rename the podcast. And so I named it the Will Spencer Podcast because that's the least likely name to change. So
That's got a chance. That's got a future right now at this moment.
Exactly. Well, I didn't want to name it something else only to get tired of it in a couple of years. Like, okay, well, what subject am I going to explore now? It's like, this is just like the Joe Rogan podcast, the Tucker Carlson podcast. Like it's named after the host. And so what my podcast now is, I prefer having long form conversations with authors, thought leaders, and influencers who help us understand our changing world. So what I try to do is bring a Christian worldview to conversations with influential men and women. Maybe most of them are Christians, but they know that I'm a Christian before jumping on. Like just today, maybe you've heard of a man named James Lindsay. James Lindsay is a very popular socio-political commentator. I have a podcast that came out with him just today, 3.5 hours we talked for, which is an incredible amount of time. Exactly.
Yeah, long time.
All right.
Yeah. And so it was a wonderful conversation, especially in the second half. We got into faith, where he is with regards to faith and some very sincere moments, because over a couple hours, you can really build rapport with somebody and really do something if they have the time and the willingness, if you have chemistry. And I enjoy that process quite a bit. So that's the Will Spencer Podcast. You can find that at willspencer.co. And Lord willing, that podcast will continue to grow as I bring a Christian worldview to the conversation.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it will. I know it will, and I'm just proud of you and glad that you're doing it. I really am. People need to hear different voices that are still speaking the same thing.
Yeah.
That in Christ we have victory. We overcome the world. And Jesus even said that to us. He said, look, in this world you'll have trouble, but in me and you'll have peace. For I have overcome the world. And so it's amazing. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've really learned a lot because I've not found anyone like you who's really went the whole gamut of searching all the different Eastern mystic religions, pagan religions, encountered so many different things, and then ultimately come down to it. What I've been preaching my whole life is still the truth. It's the truth. But I understand people are coming from so many different directions, and they're trying to find the truth. There's so much. There's so many noise. There's a lot of noises, a lot of voices, a lot of things out there that derail people, take them down to detours, all kinds of different directions. And it's just good to know that someone can find their way. When they do, there's joy. Okay, there's relief. There's joy, and knowing Christ.
Amen. Thank you for that. I give thanks. In fact, I was praying and reading Psalms this morning just before we jumped on the podcast, and just giving thanks to God for delivering me from all that and the incredible gift He's given me. Like He could have abandoned me 10,000 times. I'll never know as many times, but He didn't, and God was faithful. And not only that, like he plucked me out of that world, and He's given me something to do. He's given me a platform to preach the gospel from.
Amen.
Friends and a wife and a fiance now, and health and prosperity. I just overflowing abundance. It's just with gratitude for Him.
Amen.
And it's to hear my story and to be able to tell it and then see where I am now. It's profoundly humbling. I'm very grateful.
So have you written a book yet?
I was speaking to a publisher earlier this year about it. I need to write the book.
You do. You really do.
I'd be grateful for any advice on how to approach the book in a way that would benefit and bless the most people. Because I lived it firsthand, but knowing how to tell the story in a way that blesses people is always, of course, the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
I'll be in prayer about that. And there is, God will give the answer on how to make the title's huge, but the approach to it will be to an abandoned world. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
You have really been through it, and those experiences need to be articulated yet taking them on the journey. You went through the journey, so now you got to take people through the journey. And there's folks that's going to jump on that have been in different parts, maybe not all of them, but they've been in different ones. So how does the Buddhist find Christ? How does the Hindu find Christ? How does the atheist, the agnostic, the abandoned, the abused, the ones left out, how do they all find Christ? They can all jump on this road because you've been down the whole road. You've turned just about down every corner. Okay. Mm-hmm. And they can find he's waiting. He's waiting. He's waiting at the end.
Right. Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Your story will be great.
So thank you.
Yeah.
What I really want Christians to know and understand is, the fallenness of the world is real. And one of the things that I've discovered is that, it is a great blessing to grow up in a Christian home and a Christian family and in a Christian community. But in many ways, it's like the Shire. So Frodo at the start of the Lord of the Rings is in the Shire, and he probably wouldn't have believed that out there were black riders and flaming eyes and armies of ghostly men. But he goes on this journey out there into the world, and to see it's much more complicated and frightening, than he would have believed. And he has a central role to play in that. Not everyone is like me, called out of the Shire to go on that adventure. Surely most people are very happy to spend their lives within the same zip code or the same small town and to travel just once. Certainly not everyone wants to or even should do things that I did. But what I want to bring back to Christians is help them to understand just how many people are lost and searching out there, how many false teachings there are, and what a gift Christ is. I know how difficult it can be to take the things that we grew up with for granted. And I encourage Christians to not do that, because if you're born in the truth and you've grown up in the truth, and the truth is the only thing that you've known, don't let go of it. I will tell you, there is nothing else out there. I've looked. And when I came to Christ, I was like, look, if it's not here, it's nowhere. Because I've looked and that's, of course, it's always in the last place you look, right?
Right.
Yeah. But you did it.
Amen. But God brought me back from all of it.
Well, for anybody listening today, I'll put everything in the comments below. There will be links there for you. But I really encourage you to go and check out Will's podcast. There's a good audio video podcast right here on YouTube. He's pretty much everywhere. It's better production value than our podcast. So we're taking notes from Will and trying to learn from him as well.
Amen.
But finally, I just wanted to say, Will, thanks so much for sharing your story, your journey, and your faith with us today. Hearing about your search for truth that led you through so many different places and ultimately to Christ has been both powerful and encouraging for not only us, but for all of our listeners and your listeners as well. Your experiences offer a lot of clarity for people trying to make sense of a spiritual noise, and your testimony is a reminder that no matter how far we search, the truth is always found right there with Jesus Christ. Amen. For everyone watching or listening, again, like I mentioned, you can learn more about Will's work, his podcast, and his mission at willspencer.co. And also, if you'd like to connect with him through our platform, I have all of his links. We've created a guest page on our website as well. You'll find that in the description. Will, we appreciate your time and your message. Thank you once again, and God bless you.
Thank you so much.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on the Paul Begley Podcast. New episodes will be released every Tuesday on all major podcast streaming platforms. For a video recording of this episode, you can watch and subscribe on our YouTube channel at Paul Begley Podcast. Hey guys, we want you to connect with us. Follow us on X and Twitter at Paul Begley Pod. We'd love to hear your questions you want us to answer on the show. For additional Paul Begley content, go to our website at paulbegleyprophecy.org. If you've thought about it, we'll talk about it. Paul Begley Podcast.